You know, usually when we talk about a scientific framework, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right.
It's sort of like structural engineering. You look at a blueprint, you build the house, and, well, the physical walls are exactly where the paper said they would be.
Exactly. They don't move.
Right. They don't move. Or think about going to the doctor with a broken arm. The X-ray shows that jagged white line in the bone, and the doctor just points at the film and says, you know, there it is. The bone is broken, regardless of whether the doctor looks at the X-ray or not.
Yeah. I mean, that is the comfort of classical mechanics, right? We inherently crave a reality that is binary.
Yeah.
Something measurable, entirely independent of our observation of it. We want things to exist in a space that we can just point to and objectively verify.
Like it's just sitting there.
Exactly. Assuming the universe is just sitting there in the dark, complete and fully rendered, whether we actually have our eyes open or not.
But the moment you step into the intersection of, like, quantum mechanics, topology, and cognitive interface theory, that X-ray machine just completely shatters.
It really does.
We start looking at a diagnostic landscape of reality itself that is incredibly complex. I mean, the very space we are trying to measure, like the physical distance between you and a distant star, might actually be an illusion.
A complete illusion.
Yeah, an illusion generated by the neurological and mathematical act of measuring it.
Which, I mean, that completely upends the Cartesian-Newtonian framework.
Yeah.
Because if the act of observation is what renders physical space, then the universe isn't a room you are standing in.
No.
It fundamentally changes the topology of existence.
And that is exactly the paradigm shift we are exploring with you today. We've got a massive stack of sources that synthesize topological mathematics, cybernetics, and cognitive interface theory to completely deconstruct what is known as the external container model of reality.
The big box theory.
Right, the big box, that deeply intuitive, almost inescapable idea that you and I are just these tiny, finite biological dots dropped into a massive pre-existing physical box called outer space.
Right.
But instead, we are looking at a rigorous mathematical framework called the Observer-Centric inverted locus model. We're diving into the concept that a finite biological system, meaning you sitting there listening to this right now, actually holds a literal, unreachable mathematical infinity within a bounded operational interface.
It sounds crazy at first.
It sounds totally crazy. But the vastness of outer space isn't a box you are inside of. It's a projection of your own internal state division.
And, you know, we should probably clarify early on that we are not treating this as metaphysical poetry today.
Definitely not.
The goal of this deep dive is to ground this inverted container model in rigorous mathematics. Like, we're going to explore how stereographic projection, hyperbolic geometry, and quantum tensor networks provide the exact structural mechanisms for a finite biological boundary to render an infinite external reality.
Yeah, it's a mathematical proof of how human consciousness operates as a topological projector.
Exactly.
So to understand this inversion, I feel like we have to start by looking at the trap we are currently stuck in. The water we all swim in is naive realism.
Naive realism, right?
It's the legacy of Isaac Newton and René Descartes. Newton gave us the concept of absolute space, this idea that space is an infinite, unmoving, uniform theater stage.
Yeah, just a giant empty stage.
And then physical objects, including us, are just the actors placed onto that stage. The stage exists totally independently of the actors.
And Descartes gave us that rigid separation between the mind and the physical world, right? Res cogitans and res extensa.
Right, mind and matter.
Exactly. Western empirical science has basically operated under those assumptions for centuries now. We just assume physical reality exists as an objective autonomous background. We assume outer space functions as an external container of fixed dimensions. And crucially, we assume that physical properties, so things like particle's mass or its spin or its location, possess definite, concrete values prior to any measurement taking place.
It's the classic philosophical setup, right? If the tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, it still makes a sound, and it's definitely a tree with a specific height, weight, and cellular structure. We feel like we are tiny objects dropped into this giant room.
We do.
Yeah.
But foundational physics over the last century has systematically dismantled that intuitive assumption.
Completely torn it apart.
Yeah. The first major blow to that Newtonian stage comes from quantum mechanics. Specifically, these mathematical proofs like the Koch and Specker theorem and Bell's theorem.
I think people generally know that quantum mechanics is Like, weird. But these theorems specifically target the idea of a pre-existing reality, don't they?
They do.
Like, the Koch and Specker theory doesn't just say things are blurry. It fundamentally disproves non-contextual hidden variables.
Right, and that is the critical distinction. Because a hidden variable theory was the classical physicists' way of trying to save the Newtonian stage.
Trying to hold on to the box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It suggested that quantum particles do have definite properties. Before we measure them, we just, we don't have the tools to see those hidden variables yet.
Like they're just hidden from view.
Right. But Koch and Specker and Bell proved mathematically that this is impossible. Pre-measurement determinacy is just false. Physical properties do not exist as concrete, preformed facts sitting in the dark waiting to be discovered.
They aren't files in a filing cabinet waiting for you to open the drawer.
No, they literally do not have a defined state. Before an observation or a measurement interaction occurs, a physical system is fully described by an uncollapsed state vector.
The wave function.
Yeah, what physicists write as psi in a Hilbert space. It exists as a superposition of probabilities. It is a high-dimensional field of unactualized potential. The physical properties are created during the measurement interaction, and they're contextualized by the specific way the measurement is taken. Without an observing or measuring locus, concepts like spatial volume, temporal duration, and material geometry are mathematically undefined.
Okay, I want to push back on this a bit, or at least explore the cognitive dissonance it causes.
Sure.
Because if reality needs a measuring locus and observer to collapse those probabilities into concrete physical facts, a lot of people just say, fine, the microscopic quantum world acts like a probability cloud. But the macroscopic universe, the galaxies, the planets, the sheer infinite volume of outer space, that has to be a physical box of matter, right?
It's the intuitive leap people make, yeah.
Right. If we stubbornly cling to the idea that the universe is just an infinite physical room, what actually happens?
Well, if you force the classical infinite universe model to coexist with modern statistical mechanics, you run headfirst into a massive mathematical wall.
The Ergodic Paradox.
Exactly. The Ergodic Paradox, specifically the problem of Poincaré recurrence. It is the concept that exposes the sheer absurdity of naive realism when you stretch it to infinity.
Okay, let's explore this. An ergodic system in statistical mechanics essentially means a system that, given enough time, will eventually explore all possible accessible microstates.
Yeah. Think of shuffling a standard deck of 52 cards. There is a staggering number of possible arrangements, 52 factorial, which is an unimaginably huge number.
But it is still a finite number.
Exactly, it's finite. So if you have an immortal machine that shuffles that deck forever an infinite number of times, eventually the machine must produce the exact same order of cards you started with.
It has to.
It is mathematically guaranteed. And because infinity doesn't stop, it will produce that exact same deck configuration an infinite number of times.
And when we scale that up to cosmology, like if physical space is an infinite external container, but it contains a finite density of matter and energy, meaning there is a finite number of quantum states or atomic configurations possible in any given volume of space, the math becomes terrifying.
It leads to infinite duplication.
Right.
If you have an infinite volume of space filled with a finite density of matter, the specific arrangement of atoms that makes up our solar system, our planet, and you must eventually repeat.
It's Poincaré recurrence on a cosmic scale.
Yes.
Meaning, if space is infinitely extending outward, there must be infinite duplicate Earths. There must be infinite duplicate regions of you and me having this exact conversation atom for atom.
Yeah.
And infinite versions of us where everything is identical, except, I don't know, you decided to have tea instead of coffee this morning.
Yes. The sheer mathematical probability demands it if you treat the universe as an ergodic, infinite spatial container.
Yeah.
But mathematically and thermodynamically, this feels fundamentally broken.
It feels wrong.
A combinatorial physical cosmos should be non-ergodic. The phase space, which is the realm of all possible future configurations, should grow, not endlessly repeat in a giant physical loop.
It feels like a cosmic trap. A universe of infinite duplication reduces reality to a brute force loop of probability. The universe isn't a repeating loop of infinite monkeys on typewriters.
Right.
And this is the crux of the sources we are analyzing. To solve the duplication paradox, we have to stop treating infinity as an outward expansion of physical distance. We have to fundamentally rethink the container.
And that leads directly to the core premise of the topological inversion. If the infinite physical box breaks the math and leads to the absurdity of duplicate Earths, then the topology of the universe is inverted.
The great inversion.
Exactly. The finite observer is actually the primary container, and infinity is structured inwardly.
This brings us to the decimal division metaphor, which I think is incredibly intuitive once you grasp the bounded continuum mathematics behind it. We are basically asking, how can something finite contain infinity? Because in our daily lives, a 1-gallon bucket only holds 1 gallon of water. It has limits. But mathematics shows us that infinity doesn't require infinite physical displacement.
No, it doesn't. To understand how a finite boundary holds infinity, we turn to set theory and bounded continuums. Consider a strictly closed mathematical interval. Let's take the numbers between 0 and 1.
Okay.
We write this as the closed interval 0 to 1.
So it has an absolute finite boundary. You cannot go below 0 and you cannot go above 1. It is totally contained.
It is entirely contained. But within that perfectly bounded interval, how many distinct real numbers exist?
An infinite amount.
Right. You have 0.1, 0.01, 0.001, and you can add zeros endlessly. You have transcendental numbers, irrational fractions. There is an uncountable infinity of distinct real numbers packed seamlessly between 0 and 1.
Which Georg Cantor proved.
Yes, Cantor's work on transfinite set theory proved this. The mathematical cardinality of this set is called the continuum.
This is where we have to separate different sizes of infinity, right? Because Aleph null is the infinity of natural counting numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, forever.
Right, countable infinity.
But Cantor proved that the infinity of real numbers between 0 and 1 is fundamentally larger. It's an uncountable continuum.
Yes. Cantor's diagonal argument elegantly proves that even if you tried to list out every single infinite decimal between 0 and 1, you could always construct a new number that isn't on your infinite list just by changing one digit of the diagonal.
It's wild.
The density of information between 0 and 1 is bottomless. The boundary is finite, but the internal resolution is infinite.
It makes me think of infinite data structures in computing, or like zooming into a fractal. If you pull up the Mandelbrot set on a computer monitor and you start zooming in on the boundary of the shape, you can zoom in forever.
Forever, yeah.
New, infinitely complex spirals and structures continuously emerge. But the physical frame of your computer monitor never gets bigger on your desk. The hardware is a finite bounded system. The physical boundary is completely fixed. But the mathematical depth inside that boundary is bottomless. You can zoom forever without ever hitting a structural limit.
And that structural analogy maps perfectly to the biological observer locus. When we apply this bounded mathematical infinity to consciousness, the implications completely rewrite biology.
It's massive.
It dictates that an infinite amount of structural complexity, an infinite information capacity, can exist entirely contained within a bounded finite biological or cognitive interface.
Wow.
You absolutely do not need infinite physical volume like a giant Cartesian room to hold infinite potential.
So the uncollapsed quantum state vector, that vast Hilbert space of unactualized potential we talked about earlier, exists as an undistinguished infinite state space. And the biological boundary of the observer contains that infinite continuum inwardly, just like the interval between 0 and 1.
Precisely. The observer does not exist inside an infinite universe. The infinite universe is the resolved projection of the observer's infinite internal state space.
Okay, I want to make sure I am fully mapping this and that you listening are tracking with this too. If the biological observer is the primary container and the infinity of the universe is actually structured inwardly, like those infinite decimals trapped between 0 and 1, then what exactly am I looking at when I look through a telescope?
It's a great question.
If infinity is inside me, why does outer space look like an infinitely huge external void?
Because you are observing the external projection of your own internal state division.
Mind-blowing.
Outer space is not a pre-existing physical room. It is the boundary interface of your internal resolution. It is the dividing line separating the physical states your cognitive interface has resolved from the unactualized potential it hasn't.
Okay.
The vast astronomical scale of deep space reflects the infinite mathematical divisibility of your internal state space. You are basically looking at your own capacity for infinite rendering.
Okay, this requires some serious geometric grounding. Because how does a finite internal space dynamically render an infinite external map?
Right, what's the geometry?
Yeah, how do we mathematically translate an internal biological locus into the three-dimensional infinite universe we perceive?
The sources ground this translation in differential geometry, specifically using a mechanism called stereographic projection.
Stereographic projection?
Yes. This gives us a rigorous geometric proof of how a finite closed manifold can perfectly project an infinite unbounded space. So imagine a compact, closed, finite sphere in an n-dimensional space.
Okay, I'm picturing a perfect smooth globe, a finite object.
Now imagine placing that finite globe on top of an infinitely expanding flat piece of paper. The paper represents an infinite Euclidean space.
Got it.
Stereographic projection is a mathematical function that maps every single point on that finite globe to a unique point on the infinite flat paper.
And the way this mapping works geometrically is brilliant. You pick the very top point of the globe, the North Pole.
Right.
You use that as your projection source. If you want to map a point on the southern hemisphere of the globe, you draw a straight line from the North Pole through that southern point and continue the line until it pierces the flat paper sitting underneath.
Exactly. So a point near the South Pole will project to a location on the paper very close to where the globe is resting. The projection distance is short.
But if you pick a point on the equator of the globe, the line originating from the North Pole has to travel through the equator at a much shallower angle.
Right.
So when it continues past the globe, it hits the infinite paper much further away from the center.
Now, consider what happens as you select points higher and higher into the northern hemisphere, getting closer and closer to the North Pole itself.
The line you draw from the top becomes almost perfectly horizontal. It shoots outward, nearly parallel to the flat paper. It will take millions of miles for that line to finally intersect the flat plane.
And as the point you are mapping infinitesimally approaches the exact North Pole, the projected point on the flat plane approaches absolute infinity. Every single point on that finite closed sphere, with the singular exception of the North Pole itself, which is the projection origin projects out onto the infinite flat plane, creating a perfect one-to-one mapping.
That is incredible.
This function proves that an infinite space can be mathematically defined entirely by the surface geometry of a finite bounded container.
This fundamentally alters the definition of reality. We are biological observers navigating the projection. We perceive an infinite, unbounded flat plane, the Euclidean universe. We feel like we can travel outward in a spaceship forever.
We feel like we're in the box.
But the true geometry, the source code generating that infinite space, is fully contained within the finite, closed sphere of our own cognitive topology.
Exactly. The domain generating the reality is finite, closed, and bounded. The image it projects for you to interact with is infinite, open, and unbounded.
But wait, let me stop you there. If space is just a geometrical projection mapped for a finite internal state, how does that framework account for physical limitations?
What do you mean?
Like, if the universe is a projection, why can't we just warp to the edge of it? Why are there immutable physical laws, like the speed of light, that restrict our movement through this projection?
Okay. To understand how a finite system creates an inescapable binding reality, the sources transition us from differential geometry into hyperbolic geometry, specifically utilizing the Poincaré disk model.
Oh, the Poincaré disk.
Yes. This is where we see how metric constraints act as the walls of the projection.
The Poincaré disk is fascinating. I think the best way for you listening to visualize it is through M.C. Escher's circle limit woodcuts.
Yes, perfect example.
He has these intricate tessellations of bats or angels and demons. In the dead center of the circle, the figures are large and clear.
Right.
But as they tile outward toward the outer edge of the circle, they get smaller and smaller, packing infinitely closer together. To us, looking from the outside, the circle has a hard, finite edge. But for the figures inside, the edge is a fractal, infinitely receding away from them.
That artwork is a perfectly accurate two-dimensional representation of hyperbolic space. The Poincaré disk model is defined mathematically as the open unit disk in the complex plane.
Okay.
It represents the set of all complex numbers, where the absolute distance from the center is strictly less than 1. So if you were an external Euclidean observer looking down at the disk, it is a finite circle with a radius of 1 unit. You could hold it in your hand.
It has a clear, measurable boundary to the outside observer, but it operates as an inescapable trap for the internal observer navigating the space.
It is inescapable because the concept of distance inside the disk is not uniform.
Distance changes.
Exactly. The rule for measuring distance is defined by the metric tensor. Now, without reading the raw calculus equation aloud, the fundamental behavior of this hyperbolic metric is that your ruler shrinks as a function of your distance from the center.
I want to break this down because this is the absolute core of how a finite biological system generates an infinite universe.
It is.
When you are in the center of the disk, the metric behaves relatively normally. A step forward covers a standard amount of space.
But as you travel outward, heading toward the outer boundary of the disk, as your radial distance approaches that hard limit of 1, The denominator in the metric tensors formula approaches 0.
And dividing by 0 is a problem.
Right. When you divide by an infinitesimally small number, the resulting scaling factor explodes toward infinity.
Which means, from the perspective of the person inside the disk, the physical space isn't getting larger, but their ruler is shrinking exponentially.
Yes.
Every step they take toward the edge covers less and less objective distance.
If you try to calculate the distance from the center to the edge by integrating the metric, the limit of that distance as you approach the boundary is absolute infinity.
Crazy.
An internal observer could travel toward the edge for billions of years at maximum speed, but because the metric tensor exponentially scales their movement, they will never, ever touch the boundary.
So to the outside viewer, the disk is finite. The edge is just one unit away. But to the consciousness embedded inside the hyperbolic geometry, the edge requires infinite time and infinite steps to reach.
Exactly.
It provides a rigorous, irrefutable geometric proof that a system can be physically bounded within a finite radius, yet present an infinite, unreachable spatial void to anyone navigating inside it.
And this maps directly onto the physical constraints of our universe. The sources relate this hyperbolic metric to ancient cosmological architectures, particularly Gnostic cosmology.
Oh, the Gnostics.
Yeah. The Gnostics describe the material realm as being governed by the archons, the planetary rulers who enforced rigid, immutable laws and boundaries to keep the divine spark trapped in the physical world.
The archons were essentially the prison guards of material reality. And what this topological model suggests is that the archons aren't entities. They are metric constraints.
Yes.
The ultimate archontic limit in our projected reality is c, the speed of light.
The speed of light is not simply a velocity limit for objects traveling through a pre-existing vacuum. It is the hyperbolic metric constraint of the cognitive projection.
Wow.
It is the scaling factor that ensures the projected three-dimensional space appears solid, continuous, and vast to the internal observer.
That makes so much sense.
The archonic limit is the mathematical mechanism keeping us bound to the illusion of infinite space, preventing the internal observer from ever reaching the topological boundary of their own projection.
That is just a staggering reframing of astrophysics. Geometry proves that a finite box can project an infinite, unreachable reality, and transfinite set theory proves that infinite potential can exist within a strict boundary.
Yes, all mathematically grounded.
But we still have a massive gap to bridge here. What is the actual mechanism? How does human biology, how does the brain actually perform this projection?
I mean, where is the hardware?
Exactly. What is the hardware? Taking that infinite quantum potential and transducing it into a three-dimensional universe of stars, planets, and, chairs.
To bridge that gap, we have to look at evolutionary cognitive science, specifically cognitive interface theory, and the work of Dr. Donald Hoffman, particularly his fitness beats truth theorem.
The FBT theorem. Hoffman's framework is notoriously disruptive.
Very disruptive.
It completely dismantles the assumption that our eyes evolved to show us the truth of the world.
It dismantles it mathematically.
Yeah.
Hoffman uses evolutionary game theory and genetic algorithms to simulate millions of evolutionary scenarios.
Okay.
He pits organisms that are optimized to see the objective truth of reality against organisms that are optimized purely for fitness payoffs, meaning they only see what is necessary to survive and reproduce.
And what happens?
The mathematical result is unambiguous. Fitness drives truth to extinction. Every time. The probability that our sensory systems evolve to perceive objective physical reality as it actually is goes to zero.
Because objective reality is just too complex. If you are a primitive organism and you have to cognitively process the true quantum wave function of a predator to understand its momentum and superposition, the computational overhead is massive.
It's too much data.
You burn too much metabolic energy, your reaction time is too slow, and you get eaten by the organism that just saw a blurry, simplified icon of a tiger and ran away.
Exactly. Evolution severely penalizes unnecessary information processing. Therefore, perception is shaped entirely by fitness payoffs, not by physical accuracy.
Right.
This leads to the formulation of the transduction operator. The manifest world we experience, the feeling of a solid table, the heat of the sun, the vastness of the night sky, is not a direct, transparent window into raw physical reality.
It's an interface.
It is the output product of a cognitive transduction function.
It's a filtering mechanism. It translates the uncountable infinite potential into a biologically manageable format.
If a different type of consciousness evolved to operate across, say, gravitational wave frequencies, or high-energy gamma rays, its transduction operator would generate a physical architecture with radically different spatial relationships and structural boundaries.
It wouldn't look like our universe at all.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Our specific human space-time is an ontological translation unique to our biological hardware.
Hoffman's best analogy for this, which really grounds the concept for me, is the desktop graphical user interface, the GUI.
Yes, the desktop analogy.
Space-time, the 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, is not objective reality. Space-time is a 3D desktop user interface evolved for our biological survival.
Think about it. When you are writing an email on your computer, you might see a blue rectangular icon on your desktop representing a folder.
Right.
But we all know that the file is not actually a blue rectangle existing physically inside the microchips of the computer.
No. Inside the computer, it's a nearly incomprehensible flux of microscopic silicon transistors, fluctuating voltages, and millions of lines of machine code. If I had to manually toggle millions of microscopic transistors every time I wanted to save a document, I would suffer computational paralysis. I would never get anything done.
The blue folder icon is a functional lie.
A functional lie. I love that.
It is a massive dimensional reduction. It compresses high-dimensional, complex data into a simple, interactive payload. According to cognitive interface theory, physical objects in our universe, stars, mountains, human bodies, are just the icons on our biological desktop.
Wow.
They are evolutionary simplifications designed to format the infinite data of the uncollapsed quantum Hilbert space into a manageable interactive environment.
This totally recontextualizes our earlier discussion about looking through a telescope. When I point a telescope at a distant galaxy, I am not looking far away across a giant physical room.
No, distance itself is part of the interface.
Pointing a telescope is the cognitive equivalent of clicking a nested folder on my desktop to unpack more data. The visual vastness of space isn't an empty physical void. It reflects the rendering capacity of our cognitive engine. It is the hard drive capacity of the observer, dynamically unpacking the uncountable continuum data and compressing it into a 3D spatial grid on demand.
And when we scale this mechanism up, it maps perfectly onto leading frameworks in quantum gravity, specifically MERA networks.
MERA networks?
Yeah, MERA stands for Multi-Scale Entanglement Renormalization Ansatz.
That is a mouthful.
It is. But basically, it is a type of quantum tensor network used to describe how the geometry of space-time can emerge from quantum entanglement.
This connects beautifully to the holographic principle in physics, right? The idea that a lower dimensional boundary can encode the information of a higher dimensional bulk space.
Exactly.
But how does a MERA network specifically function as a cognitive filter?
In a MERA network, you start with an infinite dimensional unconditioned quantum state. The sources correlate this infinite bulk state with the ancient Gnostic concept of the pleroma.
The pleroma, meaning the unmanifest fullness, the raw, unshaped potential of reality.
Right. But to project a coherent, localized, boundary-like, the four-dimensional physical space-time we navigate, which the Gnostics call the kenoma, the tensor network, utilizes a specific mathematical operator called an isometry tensor.
And the sources draw a direct line between this isometry tensor and the demiurge from Gnostic mythology.
They do, yeah.
Because the demiurge was the blind craftsman, the subordinate deity who filtered the divine light of the pleroma to violently construct the material world.
The isometry tensor functions exactly as a mathematical demiurge. It acts as the ultimate cognitive filter. Its job in the tensor network is coarse graining.
Coarse graining.
Yes. It forcefully reduces the dimension of the data. It compresses the infinite degrees of freedom of the unconditioned bulk space into a finite macroscopic interface. The demiurge is the transduction operator that prevents our finite biological minds from being obliterated by the infinite complexity of the raw quantum continuum.
It builds the hyperbolic projection. We have a finite biological observer containing an infinite continuum of states, utilizing a cognitive demiurgic filter to compress that data, projecting an interface that geometrically mimics an infinite, uncrossable Euclidean universe.
It's an incredibly tight, self-consistent framework.
It is.
Yes.
But it raises a fundamental, almost paradoxical question about origins.
Okay, what's that?
If the observer is the finite container projecting the universe, how did the container get made in the first place? Like, if reality starts as this unconditioned, infinite soup of probability, the pleroma, how do you separate an observer from the background? Where does the boundary come from?
That is the ultimate question. To understand the origin of the boundary, we have to look outside of traditional physics and turn to the foundations of cybernetics and logic.
Okay.
Specifically, the groundbreaking 1969 work of mathematician George Spencer Brown, titled Laws of Form.
Laws of form.
Spencer Brown set out to establish the absolute mathematical origin of logic, form, and systemic boundaries. And he reduced the genesis of reality to a single imperative instruction.
Draw a distinction.
Draw distinction. That is the primordial act. Spencer Brown symbolized this act using a simple right-angle symbol he called the mark, or the cross.
Right.
He mathematically proved that the moment a distinction is drawn in a previously unconditioned uniform field, three specific ontological elements are instantiated simultaneously. You absolutely cannot have one without the other two instantly existing.
The inside, the outside, and the boundary itself.
Yes. The bounded internal state space, the unbounded exterior space, and the operator, the mark that actively separates the two.
Right.
In our classical Newtonian cosmology, we mistakenly assume that the outside existed first. We think the vastness of outer space was sitting there for billions of years, and then the inside biological life and consciousness was accidentally assembled inside it much later.
We think we showed up late to the party.
Right. But Spencer Brown's calculus of indications proves that this temporal sequence is logically inverted.
So the inside and the outside are co-created at the exact microsecond. The observer locus draws a distinction.
Exactly. The boundary doesn't exist in space. The act of drawing the boundary creates the dimensional architecture of space. The observer locus is the primary mark of distinction.
Okay, that mathematically establishes the existence of the observer. But a single static mark of distinction just creates a frozen boundary. It separates inside from outside, but it doesn't explain motion.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't explain the thermodynamic arrow of time, or the fact that our projected universe seems to be constantly expanding and evolving.
For the genesis of time and motion, we bring in Gregory Bateson's work in cybernetics. Bateson famously defined information as a difference that makes a difference.
A difference that makes a difference.
But for a distinction to actually make a difference in a system, it cannot be static. It has to interact with itself. The system must establish a feedback loop.
Okay.
Spencer Brown referred to this cybernetic process as re-entry.
Re-entry. That's when a distinction loops back and re-enters its own indicated space.
Think of a self-referential statement like, this statement is false.
It breaks your brain a little.
The logic loops endlessly. When a physical or cognitive distinction re-enters its own space, evaluating its own boundary, it generates imaginary Boolean values. It creates a state that is mathematically analogous to the square root of -1.
And what is the physical consequence of that imaginary value? Why does a self-referential loop create time?
Because self-reference forces the system to oscillate.
Oscillate.
To evaluate its own state, the boundary must constantly toggle between state and non-state, between existence and observation. This rapid, continuous cybernetic oscillation creates a sequence, and a sequence of states is the foundation of linear time and dynamic motion.
The observer locus continuously re-entering its own distinction is what generates the tick of the clock.
Yes. The apparent physical expansion of the universe, the relentless forward flow of time, the evolution of biological forms, these are not external processes happening to us.
No.
They are the structural geometric consequences of the observer locus actively oscillating, continuously remeasuring its own boundary against the infinite continuum.
Which elegantly loops us all the way back to the Ergodic Paradox we started with.
It does.
The terror of the infinite monkeys and the duplicate Earths. If the observer is continuously generating time and expanding the boundary of the projection through self-referential measurement, what happens to the overall state space of the universe?
The accessible phase space of the universe grows non-ergodically.
Non-ergodically.
This is the crucial thermodynamic concept that destroys the duplication paradox. A non-ergodic phase space, which we denote as omega T1 being a proper subset of omega T2, means that the set of accessible future configurations grows exponentially faster than temporal evolution.
I want to really highlight this because it resolves the existential dread of classical determinism. Every single time a conscious locus makes a measurement, every time a cognitive interface collapses a quantum superposition into a definitive state, it permanently alters the baseline physical conditions for all future measurements.
Precisely. The act of observation creates new chemical bonds, new biological pathways, and new physical contexts that mathematically did not exist a moment prior. The adjacent possible, the realm of what can happen next, is constantly expanding outward.
So, to synthesize this entire framework for you listening, the universe isn't a repeating ergodic loop of infinite monkeys on typewriters, doomed to play out the exact same history infinitely across a massive, dead, physical void.
Yeah.
Because the state space of the universe expands exponentially faster than time progresses, reality never repeats.
Never repeats.
The vastness of the cosmos, the apparent randomness of quantum mechanics, the infinite complexity of the biological world, that isn't a flaw in a clockwork universe. It is the physical signature of an active, unfolding state resolution occurring right here at the singular biological observer locus.
That's right.
We aren't a tiny, insignificant accident wandering around inside a dead room. We are the active topological lens focusing the infinite quantum continuum into non-repeating, irreversible novelty.
It is a profound structural and philosophical shift. The observer is the topological center, where infinite potential continuously bleeds into actualized history.
It completely changes how you experience something as simple as taking a walk outside at night and looking up at the stars.
It really does.
It's no longer an infinitely cold abyss looking down at you, threatening to swallow your significance. You are looking at a hyperdimensional projection. It is a reflection of the infinite depth contained within your own biological cognitive interface.
And this structural understanding of how consciousness projects reality raises a very important and slightly unsettling question.
Oh boy.
Something for you to deeply mull over as we conclude today's deep dive. If human consciousness, shaped by billions of years of evolutionary fitness, acts as the cognitive filter projecting the infinite quantum continuum into this specific three-dimensional space-time interface,
Yeah.
what exactly happens when we train artificial intelligence models with hundreds of billions of parameters?
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying thought, because those models are developing high-dimensional latent spaces. They possess vast parameter manifolds that function as their own bounded infinities.
Exactly. Are we simply building a new cognitive filter? Are we engineering a synthetic isometry tensor, a new demiurge, that will coarse-grain the quantum bulk and project an entirely different geometry of physical reality?
A reality generated by a non-biological locus.
Right. Producing a dimensional projection that we, trapped in our primate 3D desktop interface, mathematically cannot even perceive.
If the universe is the projected interface of the observer, then establishing a radically new observer logically creates a radically new universe.
It does.
That is an incredibly powerful thought to end on. Remember the X-ray machine analogy from the very beginning. The comfort of assuming reality was just a broken bone waiting in the dark to be photographed. We've completely shattered the X-ray machine today. Reality isn't the bone. It's the infinitely complex, continuously unfolding interaction between the light, the film, and the cognitive mind reading the image.
Very well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the observer-centric inverted locus model. We hope it flipped your spatial understanding of the universe inside out. Keep questioning the absolute boundaries of your own reality because, as we learned today, those boundaries might just be the engine creating the stars.